The Godfather. Even if it insists on itself, it was a big deal back at its release, both Mario Puzo's novel and the Francis Ford Coppola adaptation. Mob stories are nothing new. We've been telling them as a country for quite some time, but in a genre that felt pretty old hat and stuck in James Cagney land, The Godfather was a real shot in the arm that made everyone want to mumble about crime in dark rooms and yell at their wimpier cohorts to be a man!
What's the matter with you?
Another thing that was big around the novel's 1969 release was Vietnam and the fact that we were still there. These things, as separate as they may seem, came together to form the Executioner, our one-man army in the war on the Mafia. Well, lock and load, fellas, because we're shipping off with Mack Bolan as he ventures to lay London low in an assault on Soho. Mack Bolan was created in 1969 by Don Pendleton, a man with a career nuts enough that he sounds like a Don Pendleton character. He enlisted in the US Navy fraudulently at the age of 14, managing to serve in both World War II and Korea before doing civilian telegraphing and air traffic controlling, then supporting engineering projects like the Titan family of ICBMs, the Apollo missions, and the C-5 Galaxy transport plane. Then at 40, the guy decided to take up writing, which he did for a number of years under pen names, before hitting upon Vietnam veteran turned vigilante Mack Bolan, which had 6 million copies in print by its 6th installment in 1971. You heard me right. In 2 years, Pendleton wrote and published 6 of these things, and in the span of 11 years, he would write 38 in total. Friends, countrymen, 3% of my audience that's from the UK. There are 400 Executioner books. Over 600 if you count the double-sized Super Bolan books as well. Everything past the OG 38 is a slurry of various ghostwriters, but goodness gracious. Pendleton, with the creation of the Executioner, is sometimes credited with the invention of the men's action-adventure book market, which doesn't really make much sense. Now sure, you could say that it sparked a new line, or perhaps a revitalization in the men's action format for that dawning 70s world, but considering there's about 50 years of pulp adventure and tough guys that precede Bolan, we can reckon that anyone who wants to bestow that honor upon Pendleton will have to fight the ghost of Mickey Spillane. Anyway, Bolan, the one-man army, a sniper and manhunter in Vietnam with over 80 confirmed kills, but possessing the maliceless heart of a soldier with a soft spot for the innocent. Upon returning home, he discovers his father had money troubles and ended up being raked over the coals by a mafia loan shark. His debt got to a point that the mob was going to sell Mack's sister into prostitution. The elder Bolan did what any sane man backed against the wall would do, and that's kill himself after killing his wife and daughter. Perfect. Mack swears revenge on the mob and mobsters everywhere, using his skills to wipe them from the face of the earth. His killings earn him a nickname, said with shivers and cold sweat by gangdom everywhere: the Executioner. So you're probably thinking, hey, that sounds like another Vietnam vet who hates the mob and has a neat, spiffy name. And you'd be right. When Gary Conway created The Punisher in 1974, he directly credited the Executioner as an inspiration. Frank Castle owes quite a lot to Mack Bolan. So, what brings an American like Bolan to jolly old London? Escaping France from the previous novel's outing and heading to the US, Bolan finds himself caught between a rock and a hard place when the ever-expanding tendrils of the global mafia try to stop him in London. To make matters worse, Scotland Yard has eyes on Bolan themselves, and a final wrench comes in with a mysterious young woman and her organization that has an interest in Bolan's well-being for their own purposes. This serves as a really bizarre counterweight to Bond's Live and Let Die. That was a Brit in New York, this being an American in London. Hell, Bolan even draws attention to the comparison when he's being monitored in the lair of the mysterious Desaad Museum. Shades of James Bond, locked room, closed-circuit television, the whole bit. What's it all about? But I'm gonna level with you guys. If a Bond novel is a vodka martini, Bolan is a rum and coke. This is not exactly challenging literature. Like I talked about before, Bond takes a ton of punishment and is often reckless, hot-headed, and in over his head. His opponents are smart and sophisticated, as well as ruthless, which makes for a pretty convincing head-to-head that has some genuine suspense. It's not complex, but it's got teeth. Pendleton writes an executioner novel like the male equivalent to a Harlequin romance novel, who, funny enough, bought the rights for the executioner from Pendleton after number 38. It's all about cheap thrills. Bolan is borderline untouchable. He can be surrounded on every side and still make it out. The only way anyone gets in a shot is from a dirty trick or some other dishonorable move. Where Bond is broken, maimed, and scarred to a point of needing weeks of recovery in 30 less pages, Bolan walks out of his adventure with some buckshot-grazed ribs and a bruised head from a pistol butt, and this is after killing dozens and dozens of mafioso goons. Said goons are about the dumbest antagonists you can have. All of them are weak, sniveling backstabbers who are constantly filling their Italian pants at the mere thought of Bolan. They're unorganized, cowardly, without real loyalty, and when pressed, they also admit they kind of admire Mack because he's just too damn cool and good at killing. You ought to see what he did to us on this last hit. I bet he didn't even fire a shot himself. He had the boys shooting each other up. He's pretty tricky, eh? Cunning is the word, Nick. This fucking boy is cunning. This creates a scenario that doesn't feel like a war between one man and some unstoppable machine. Instead, we get stuff like this. Bolan immediately glided down to the Lincoln, which was idling at the curb just downrange. You boys get out here and cover Dunlap. He spotted something. 3 doors opened instantly, and quiet feet began moving off into the darkness. Bolan leaned inside and found the control lever for the spotlight. An instant later, a brilliant beam stabbed across the darkness of the square and picked up the sauntering figure of Jack Dunlap. There he is! And he spun around with a large revolver in his hand and tried to dive out of the brilliance. Others reacted quicker, and a hail of gunfire swept the spot, jerking the man about like a ragdoll and punching him into the ground. Bolan was behind the wheel and easing the car forward. "Wrong guy," he yelled, and the spot picked up another figure running in from the far side of the square. "Ah, not me!" he screeched as another rattling volley descended. Bolan had the vehicle moving swiftly now, and now into the traffic circle with all the lights extinguished. And yeah, that may be the most Bugs Bunny thing I've ever read in an action novel. So if the men think Bolan is cool, how does he do with the ladies? Well, the whole book spins on the bizarre de Sade Museum, a bordello and erotic theater based on the tortures and the words of the Marquis de Sade, where we get the word sadism. They host lavish parties for high rollers and are currently under threat for having some of these steamy hot tapes be released to the public, hence trying to retain Bolan to get their blackmailers. So we have these extended scenes of Bolan looking at people being mocked, tortured, / pleasured for the amusement of an orgy audience, and just being really uncomfortable with it. A trickling chill of revulsion traversed Bolan's spine. He was beginning to understand what sort of museum this was. Bolan was not overly sophisticated in matters of kinky sex, but he knew of the Marquis de Sade, one of the most famous writers of forbidden literature. Bolan shivered and moved on out of there. Bolan is a man of missionary or nothing. He's a gardener of simple pleasures, spreading his seed plainly without any kinks in his hose. The performance was too realistic for Bolan. He supposed the whip was made of some sort of trick material, but it was still too much for his stomach. He whirled away from the console. Mack is just short of saying, "ew," every time the subject comes up. Something of note is the interesting choice of decor for the location. A large arched doorway at the far side of the room drew Bolan's attention. It was framed by a huge wood carving of shapely buttocks, through which could be viewed an unmistakable cherrywood labia standing taller than Bolan and serving as the actual doorway. "Some museum," Bolan muttered, and stepped cautiously through the parted labia. You know, it really just ties the room together. All right, so we got our image of the vamp. Who's our ingenue? Anne Franklin works closely with the de Sade Museum, but mostly in bookkeeping and planning. She's quiet, competent, and decent under pressure. But more importantly to Pendleton and Mack, she's also drop-dead gorgeous, and the book takes every opportunity to remind you of this. It's also established that she's afraid of men after a career of working in sex clubs as staff, having been mistaken for talent on a few occasions. But Mack is just too damn cool and mysterious, and she inevitably falls for him, but he's hesitant to fall for her because of the mission. Then let's make a pact. What sort of pact? To love one another, till murder do us part. Damn it, Anne. But Mack is more than willing to at least have some common coitus with the beautiful broad, while spouting the goofiest foreplay dialogue imaginable. You already have the proof you wanted. She gave her head an emphatic shake and whispered, "Well, not quite. Everybody turns off at the same switch, Anne. It's what turns us on that makes the difference." He waved a hand over her head in a mock ceremonial gesture. I now pronounce you a natural woman.
Mack, for God's sake, make love to me.
Okay. And pushed himself clear and began coming away from his clothing. They don't get to seal their love, however, because it's interrupted by a dead chauffeur in their personal hot tub. What a buzzkill. Are you starting to get the image of the kind of book this is? I'm not here to be the arbiter of good taste. If there's room for beer and pizza and a well-rounded diet, there's room for the executioner in your reading pile. That being said, it's not that the book is completely without meat. Bolan has a philosophy and a code of ethics that he's carried since his days of being a soldier. He sees war on the Mafia as one he's eager to fight, but one that's waged largely without hatred. He sees the mob as a spreading cancer, something that takes the agency and freedom of everything it touches, either killing, buying, or enslaving everything in its path. Though I'm not sure if it's subtext or if it's unintentional, there's an implication that Bolan might be a bit lost without this war after his return from Vietnam. He observes the clipped wings of the ravens at the Tower of London, remarking how men have what makes them men taken away from them, and society still demands them to be men. There's also a reoccurring utterance of a Kipling poem regarding one cat and his walking through the jungle. Mack sees war and the ethics of a soldier as a place where man is in his element, unfettered by law and polite society. Without that war, Bolan doesn't have much to live for. In a moment of clarity, Bolan reflects, and the wave that inundated him was the cresting of his own mind and soul in a deep pool of self-doubt. For one infinite and timeless moment, he hung there in suspension between the instinct for life and the comfort of death as he let go, and slid beneath the actual waters of the warm bath. Then he came up threshing out of it, coughing and sputtering and lunging for the Beretta. Though his present danger was totally within himself, the depths of his exhaustion projected phantom enemies somewhere out there, and Bolan's response came from the very core of himself. This is all he has. Maybe some men are born to walk alone into that jungle. Now, Pendleton doesn't focus on this. Mack isn't portrayed as a broken man or a machine with only one purpose. As a matter of fact, the text stresses otherwise. But it's hard to read the book with a critical eye and not see that maybe this is a lie that Mack tells himself, trying to think of some way to preserve his soul in the midst of all the death that he himself causes. In the end, like any good cowboy, he has to walk off into the sunset and leave the girl behind, off to another war. This characterization and the overall iconography of Bolan, his all-black skin suit and all, is what I think we see most in Frank Castle. Frank is a lot like Bolan, but arguably is the other side of the coin. The soldier who had his chance to come home, who tried to make peace, before it was ripped away from him. Where Mack is cool, Frank is pure wrath. They are dark avenging angels, but in them we see the two sides of a man trapped in an endless war. The acceptance and the frothing anger of being dragged back in the first place. Pick your poison and your medium. Either one is a pretty good choice for your mafia slang vigilante. So should you be reading The Executioner? I think you can have a fun afternoon with it, sure. It's got stuff that dudes like, and if you're a dude, you'll probably enjoy it. Sometimes you just want beer and pizza. Due to the sheer number of books and popularity the character had in his heyday, you can find these books fairly easily. I've come across them in secondhand and thrift shops plenty of times before, as well as the local bookstore, so keep your eyes peeled. Next time, we ride through old California and shed light on one of the original masked Avengers, the fox so cunning and free, Zorro. Show him some guts.